thought I'd try something a little different here, and we're going to talk about some of my favorite, if not frustrating, unresolved cliffhangers in horror. You see, a good deal of horror films like to end themselves with a setup for another film, some good old-fashioned sequel bait, but then not all of them would get that sequel, so it's just this plot thread that will never get tied up. So let's take a look at some of them and figure out what would come next. Number 10. Let's start with a big one in terms of surprise, and we'll talk about Urban Legend 2. You see, after Scream was a massive hit, there was a wave of slasher flicks with pretty TV star teenagers getting bumped off, and one of them was Urban Legend. Well, spoiler alert, but the killer at the ending was revealed to be the Noxzema girl, and she is seemingly killed at the end, but you don't see the body. So there's a question of whether or not she survived. But that's not the cliffhanger, because that's the first film, and we're talking about the second one, because the sequel has a whole new set of teens, a different killer, a different motive, a different everything, and is only loosely connected to the presence of Loretta Devine. Brenda, the first film's killer, isn't talked about and isn't even a consideration for the identity of the killer, and it's revealed to be a professor at the college. And at the ending of the film, he's captured and institutionalized. But then it happens. Brenda appears at the hospital in a nurse's uniform and proceeds to wheel Solomon out, telling him that they have a lot in common, indicating that the two would team up to commit more murders and new shenanigans, likely based on urban legends. However, even though it made a good deal of money, it didn't do half as well as the first film, and it took 5 years for a third entry to be released, and that went straight to video. Plus, it was another completely different story, this one with no connections at all to the series, going in a supernatural direction as opposed to being a slasher film, and made no mention at all of Brenda or Solomon. So, I guess they're still out there, and I'm not sure if the intention was to have them leave the institution and to try to get their respective revenges. But it could have also been showing that Brenda just now worked there, hiding out as a nurse, and their meeting was merely coincidence. Number 9. Here's one that's a little sillier, but no less frustrating, but let's talk about TerrorVision. This one involved a weird little family and their accidental satellite download of a big alien called the Hungry Beast. It's this big, lovable-looking doofus, and even though it's murderous at first, they're able to calm it down by reminding it of its owner back on its original planet. That doesn't last too long, though, because it gets a little bit angry, and when it gets angry, it starts to eat people. Also, throughout the film, there's this TV horror host called Medusa that they keep on showing, and she takes an interest in the story when the kid keeps on calling in. Now, here's where things go wrong, because that alien master I mentioned earlier shows up and warns that the Hungry Beast will essentially kill everyone on the planet, but he can stop it, and it seems like it'll all be okay. However, Medusa shows up and thinks that the alien is the creature that the kid was talking about and kills him, and the beast tears down the walls and starts the chaos. The movie ends with our heroes possibly chomped, even though they don't show it, but Medusa leaves in her limo, although she's actually the Hungry Beast, since they showed earlier that it can take on the form of the people that it ingests. Now, this film was always intended as a one and done, and Ted Nicolau, the writer and director, said that he wanted to go with a downer ending, saying he wanted the most messed up ending possible. But then, when it was a flop at the box office and the reviews weren't very nice, no one wanted to talk about a sequel anyway. So, that's the way it stayed. But what happened next? Well, if you went by what that alien was saying, it's not like it's massively invulnerable or anything. He says, if we can take it alive, meaning that his original intention was to kill it. So it can be killed, and it seems terrible at keeping itself hidden. So it's likely that it would have been able to be stopped. Number 8. This is one that I personally would love to see followed up on, and now let's talk about the ending of 1983's The Deadly Spawn. This is a movie about a meteor that crashes down and an alien life form that emerges from it and starts to terrorize a small town, but mostly people in one specific house. It features one of the absolute coolest looking practical monsters in all of cinema, and our main action ends with our hero, Little Charles, blowing the creature up. It has a bunch of little badass though, and we see the authorities and people in town killing them. But then, right before the credits roll, there's a final moment in which a cop that's left by the house is on the radio with another one, and he hears this big noise and turns to see what it is and witnesses a giant, bigger than Godzilla-sized version of the Spawn erupt out of a hillside. So, the thing about this movie is that it was made for the price of a used car nowadays, 25 grand. Now, at the time, they weren't really planning on a sequel, but they wanted to end on a big spectacle, and they pulled that off. But the thing is that this sort of did have a sequel, but also didn't. You see, there was a film called Metamorphosis, and it was shot as The Deadly Spawn Part 2. And they had a beefier budget and created a modernized version of the Spawn, and it looks great. But along the way, they dropped the sequel tag and changed the title to Metamorphosis: The Alien Factor. And that made sense because it doesn't actually pick up the cliffhanger from the first film. There is a big creature, but it's a man who changes into it, and it's about the same size as the thing from the original. That kaiju-sized one is never mentioned and doesn't factor into the plot, and there's really no discussion of those events at all, so I think it's clear that it's a different continuity. So, what happened to that big boy? Well, if I had to guess, I would think that it would be a happy ending for the humans, considering that, first up, if it's like the smaller version, it's blind, so it's not the most effective big killer thing. And we also know it's vulnerable and can be blown up, so a few well-placed bombs down that gullet and I think it would be wrapped up. Especially since we don't even know if it's mobile. It may just be so big that it's stuck in one place, in that mountain. So it probably wouldn't be a really tense film. Just this big monster sitting there and then getting baboomed. Number 7. Here's a somewhat quick one, and one that's not even the proper ending as it's more of a mid-credit sequence, but let's talk about the cliffhanger for the Dawn of the Dead remake. Now, I think I'm in the minority with this one because I just don't like it that much. I mean, I think the first half is great, the setup is amazing, but I can pinpoint the exact moment when I don't like it anymore, and it's when a truck of other people show up. But I digress. Now, the ending of the film merges the finale of the original Dawn and the original Day, as our heroes choose to head off to a remote island where there won't be any zombies. Instead of flying off in a helicopter, they instead take a boat, and there's this big tense moment as they manage to set sail just as a whole horde descends on them. And that's where the movie ends. But if you stick around and watch through the credits, you get bits of them actually at sea, and it tracks their progress as they start to run out of supplies. But then, they reach an island, and everything seems like it's going to be good. But before they can get settled, a whole bunch of the undead come running out of the trees and go on the attack. Since this sequence is done in a found footage format, it ends with the camera being dropped as the zombos go running past, and we never see what happened. Of course, this left a lot of people wondering if there would be a follow-up to show what happened, but it seems as if Zack Snyder had never meant to do a part 2. In fact, he claims to have developed Army of the Dead right afterwards, although it wouldn't be made for around 2 decades, and that was not intended to be connected in any way. So there wasn't meant to be any more after this. So what happened to those people? Well, there's actually an answer to this one, and it came from James Gunn himself, because someone on Threads asked him what became of the survivors at the ending of the movie, and his only response was, "What survivors?" So, they did. They all did. Number 6. This is another one that I have some personal love for, and I figured that I have to talk about the movie Q, the Winged Serpent. This Larry Cohen classic involves a giant dragon-like beast just cruising around New York City, eating people from rooftops. One of the important plot points is that the creature is smart. Smart enough to know that it needs to fly in a certain time of day, in a certain way, so when people look up, they don't see a giant serpent flying, they're looking right towards the sun. Now, I admit that's a bit silly considering that only people standing in a certain spot would be affected by this because, you know, perspectives and such, but suffice it to say, it's not a dumb creature. But it's built this big nest up in the Chrysler building, and there's an egg in there, and the police shoot the baby inside of it. But then, the big bitch shows up, and after a skirmish with the authorities, they plug it full of holes and kill it. But then, somewhere else in the city, it turns out that there's a whole nother nest, one that they didn't find out about. And there's an egg there, which hatches into another baby. Now, look, it's a time-honored tradition by this point to show a baby creature hatching out of an egg as the final shot. Even the '98 Godzilla movie did that. Several alligator movies did it. There's no easier ending for your movie featuring your giant creature than a final shot of an egg. So, basically, me adding this on here is an ode to every film that ends this way. In this particular instance, there was never a sequel intended. Outside of the It's Alive films, Cohen wasn't really up on making follow-ups to his films, and I think it was more just meant as a tease as opposed to actual intentions to do more. There was a weird film that I wouldn't call a sequel, but it's inspired by Q, and it's called Cry of the Winged Serpent, but it's totally unrelated. And in terms of what I think would have happened afterwards, well, I don't think the baby serpent would have lasted long. The police were now aware of the existence of at least one of the things, and it wasn't too difficult to kill. And I would think an infant version just wouldn't have that same intelligence at its disposal, so any additional activities would be short-lived. Number 5. Okay, another personal favorite, and one that I'm mad never got any follow-up, and let's talk about the '88 remake of the Blob. So, the big change that this one makes is that the Blob isn't a creature from space, and instead is a government screw-up that they had to clean up. This version of the thing is way more deadly than the old school version. It has tendrils that shoot out and dissolves you just by touching you, and it looks really, really awful. But it has the same weakness in that it hates the cold. In the end of the film, they use a snow-making machine to drop the temperature down dramatically and freeze the sucker, and they're able to scoop it up and I guess go put it in cold storage or whatever. But there's this preacher character, and there's a bit where he gets a small frozen piece of it. And during the course of the film, he goes insane and believes the Blob to be God's messenger of the end times and gets burnt by a flamethrower. At the very end, he's shown to be back at the Bible thumping and giving a bit of the old doomsday gospel. After it's over, one of his flock asks him when the end is coming, and he says, soon, showing that he still has that bit of Blob. Now, this was in the late 80s, and horror franchises were huge, so I would think that they would want to make sequels, but considering that the film lost money at the box office meant that there wouldn't be any, and this would always be an unresolved plot point. There's been multiple attempts to remake it again, not do a sequel, and Rob Zombie was involved at one point, but no mention of a priest with a jar of goo. But I have to say, I think if they did have a follow-up and that thing got loose, I'm not sure that it would make it as far as the first one did. I'm sure that the stuff that happened in the film would get a lot of press coverage, and there would likely be a ton of discussion about the Blob and the fact that it hates the cold, so people would at least be aware of its weakness, so they'd be able to fight it better. I still think it would eat up a bunch of people, and it sure wouldn't be smooth sailing for anyone involved, but I don't think that it would be as effective as it was the first time around. Number 4. Oh, this is the silliest one of the bunch, but we have to talk about the ending to Deadly Friend. Wes Craven's Deadly Friend. They make sure to say that on the box cover, so to make sure that you don't confuse it with another Deadly Friend. But in that one, Paul has a pet robot that he made, and he moves to a new town and befriends Samantha. But when she dies, he puts BB's computer chip in her brain, which is supposed to try to fix her. However, BB gets a little evil and goes on a revenge streak and does a little light murder. And soon, the police are involved and they shoot Sam dead right as her chip does its job and fixes her. Now, here's where it gets wacky, because Paul goes to the morgue and I guess he's gonna try again, but something happens. Her body jumps up and grabs his neck, and from underneath her skin, a robot body pushes through, looking monstrous, and kills him. So this ending is bonkers and was not the original intention of Craven. His goal was to make a more sci-fi oriented film, but the studio wanted a violent horror film and had him go in and do reshoots, so you got bits like that basketball head crush. They also wanted a different ending, and it seems to have come straight from the president of Warner Brothers at the time. Wes hated it and basically disowned the film, so you can rest assured he wasn't angling to make a sequel. And then the fact that it was a bomb at the box office made it so that no one wanted it. People are more interested in getting the original cut of the film restored as opposed to caring what would happen next in the story. But what would happen next? Well, it looks like Paul is dead. So what if BB decides to do a little Bride of Frankenstein action? What if it chips Paul and restores his body? Did I just make a Deadly Friends sequel that I want to see? I think I did. Number 3. This next one just hurts. Hurts, I tell you, but let's talk about the ending of Deep Rising. This was a kind of goofy flick that didn't take itself too seriously and had the great Treat Williams paired up with Famke Janssen, and it all takes place on a cruise ship besieged by this tentacled creature. The grand finale involves a jet ski chase through the waterlogged hallways, which is pretty damn cool, and they escape in the nick of time as they blow up the boat and destroy the big boy. They make it to a desert island, though, and discover that Kevin O'Connor's Joey is still alive, and the trio get accustomed to their beach surroundings. But then, there's a big roar off in the distance, and we get a wider shot that reveals that they're in fact on a nightmarish landscape full of volcanoes, and some sort of massive beast is pushing through the trees to get to them. It ends with Finnegan saying his catchphrase, "Now what?" So the answer as to why there was never any follow-up was pretty obvious, since the film cost $45 million to make and yet only did $11 million in ticket sales, which I will point out that I was one of, because I saw this film when it came out, but was the only one in the theater. Any chance of exploring what would come next would be impossible now because of the passing of Treat Williams, and without him involved, what's the point really? But what was meant to happen? Well, one thing's for sure, you can most likely discount that whole rumor that this was meant to be a prequel to King Kong. Some are claiming, without any sources, that the idea was to have this be a sequel-prequel to a King Kong reboot, and at the end, they're actually on Skull Island. But since the film bombed, and the US Godzilla film did too, they ended up not going forward with it. However, considering that this was produced by Hollywood Pictures, a subsidiary of Disney, and Kong is famously a Universal product, that seems extremely unlikely, and is just the work of internet fan theory hounds. So, what happened? Most likely it's a different kind of giant monster coming at them, maybe a giant monkey, who knows, but definitely not Kong. And I also have no doubt Finnegan, Trillian, and Joey would make it alive, because they know when it's time to go. Number 2. These last two are some of the most enduring of forgotten sequel baits, but now let's talk about a great flick, Night of the Creeps. This one has the full-on invasion of the brain slugs thwarted by our heroes, including Detective Cameron, who definitely thrills us as he saves the day and destroys the remaining horde by blowing them up. But let's talk about that ending, because there's two. There's the one that's on the theatrical cut, and that does end on a cliffhanger, but it's more of a jump scare than anything else. In that one last remaining slug jumps out of a dog's mouth to attack our heroes. Problem is with that one is that the dog shouldn't be around. It's the same pup from earlier that was housing a bunch of slugs. But as we've seen, when they hatch out, the head explodes. So it seems like the dog should have as well. Anyway, but that's not the ending that we're talking about today. No, we're talking about the original ending, which showed the outside of the sorority house and a burnt up body of Detective Cameron comes shambling out. After a moment, it falls down and its head bursts with a bunch of slugs heading towards a local cemetery, seeming to animate those bodies and hatch more, setting up another entry. But to make things worse, an alien ship shows up, the same one from the film's intro, and is on the hunt for its experiment. So that would seem to be a solid setup for another entry. But it never happened. The original film didn't do well at the box office, only becoming a cult hit years later, so no one was really looking to do a follow-up. A few years later, Tom Atkins said that he loved the character of Cameron and that he and Fred Decker would talk about a sequel regularly and that they had planned one. But when Decker was asked, he said that there were no serious plans and they were just talking about it for fun. So it seems like there's no real push to get one made. I, for one, would have loved to see more, perhaps with another invasion, with all of those corpses being reanimated, but with the extra wrinkle of aliens in town looking to round them up, perhaps serving as help for our heroes, or maybe an extra hindrance. Number 1. And now, our number 1 entry. And keep in mind, I'm not calling this the most important unresolved cliffhanger ever, just the one I most would want to see on this particular list. There's so many more, but right now I have to discuss the ending of Big Trouble in Little China. After, well, a lot happens, and I mean a lot, our heroes are basking in their victory, and we get some hanging threads early because we know from the beginning of the film that Egg Chen ends up in police custody, under question, but we don't quite know the story behind that. Also, Jack leaves Gracie Law hanging, so their love story is unresolved, which is a very Jack Burton kind of thing. But then we get the bigger one. As Jack is driving away in his truck, the Pork Chop Express, we see that he's picked up a hitchhiker. This thing is referred to as the Wild Man, but it's likely meant to be a type of Yeren, a character from Chinese folklore called a hairy man. And it's not the most formidable of foes, considering he was laid out by a kick to the nards, because Wild Man got nards. But that ending was supposed to indicate that the story's not over. Egg is in custody, and the forces of evil are still at play. And considering everything involved in this film, there's so much more room for adventure of Jack and crew. But, and this is going to sound familiar, the film was a bomb. It cost around $20 million to make and only earned around $11 million, so even if there were plans for a sequel, which is doubtful considering how much Carpenter didn't like them, they were scrapped when it lost money. But here's the kicker, it did get a follow-up, just not on film, and Carpenter was actually involved. You see, there was a comic book sequel to the movie that picks up right where it left off and shows what happens to that Wild Man. Seems that he's not actually the threat that he seems, and now that Jack has killed Lo Pan, it sees him as his master. Jack names the thing Pete, and it accompanies him on his further adventure, which involved going forward in time, and even the return of Lo Pan. Carpenter helped develop the story, so it's officially sanctioned, and it's a lot of fun. So there you have it, 10 unresolved cliffhangers in horror movies. Yeah, I would like to see most of those get resolved in one way or another. The show would have been nice, especially the Deep Rising one. Sucker for that movie. Let me know your favorite one down below in the comments. Let me know which ones you would like to see on a follow-up list. And don't put the thing, because that ending is resolved. It's resolved. They're human and they die in the snow. Movie's over. But let me know what setups for a sequel that you would have liked to have seen resolved in a future film. Tell me that in the comments down below. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up to let me know you like it. If you like the channel, subscribe to it and let me know that you want to see more videos coming up by hitting that little bell. Also, check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines and help support this channel and keep it going. But yeah, that's about it. I'll see you. Oh my God! What is that?